The mistake that Trump did, and you could see the discomfort on Netanyahu's face. Why is Trump so confident? The colonial agents in the region are ready to deliver the playground that the master demands at any time. This entire theater, it is a page out of history. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وسبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستجيره ونستنصره. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين خاتم الأنبياء والرسل أجمعين، وعلى آله الأطهار الميامين، وعلى صحبه المختارين. اللهم يا علي عظيم، يا الله، اللهم لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد أن هديتنا، وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة يا رب العالمين. اللهم افتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق، اللهم افتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق، وأنت خير الفاتحين. ربنا وآتنا ما وعدتنا على رسلك ولا تخزنا يوم الدين. ربنا عليك توكلنا وإليك أنبنا وإليك المصير. فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. اللهم توفنا مع الأبرار. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون، وسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين. It is unavoidable that we end up talking about the recent comments by President Trump because of their significance and because of what they do not say, much more than what they actually said. The type of comments that came out of President Trump in Netanyahu's presence are significant because of the assumptions that they rest upon, because of the historical, ideological, theological, moral foundations and assumptions, much more importantly than what was actually articulated and the words that were actually used. Time and again, we see that Allah offers history as an ongoing school. History is a perpetual school. It's a perpetual educational institution. Those who do not pay attention, those who fail in this educational institution, those who are bad students of the educational institution of history, they are doomed to repeat it over and over and over. They remain the victims rather than the students of the school. That is the nature of the school of history. You are either a student, a fully alert, fully engaged, fully conscientious student of the school, or you are a victim of the school, and this school then expels you to the margins, where you watch those who are successful in the school move forward, as you are doomed to keep repeating the same lessons over and over and over. So, unpacking the comments made by President Trump, let's all remember, let's all recall that this is in the wake of a devastating genocidal war. The true numbers, the victims of this genocide, is unknown. Even if we estimate 70,000 known dead, the actual numbers are much higher. And for every dead person, you can count 10 whose lives are devastated and so impacted by the war that the trajectory of the fate of those impacted will never be the same. And if you do the math, then you are really talking about the entire population of Gaza. There are those who died, there are those who are wounded, but those whose lives have been devastated and irreversibly changed are too numerous to count. Let's also recall the evidence of war crimes was aplenty. That every human rights organization that investigated the conduct of this war found plenty of evidence that Israel is guilty of blatant, undeniable war crimes. That Israel systematically targeted civilian populations, that Israel committed all kinds of atrocities, and that it is well settled among human rights organizations that Israel has a track record of letting itself off the hook. That when Israel responds to an atrocity or another by saying, well, we will investigate the matter internally, that the conclusion of such an investigation is already well known. Israel has never held its military accountable for any of the atrocities committed by its military. So after meeting with Netanyahu, someone that we should all remember has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, that under international law, this is someone who has committed crimes against humanity, not just violated the Geneva Convention, but violated principles of jus cogens and preemptory norms of international law. A criminal, a war criminal, a genocidal criminal. And this is why, and let's again be very clear about this, the International Criminal Court was extremely reluctant to indict Netanyahu or to indict any Israeli official. They were extremely reluctant because the International Criminal Court still recalls what happened when it wanted to investigate war crimes committed by the United States in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And what happened was that the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court at the time paid the price for wanting to look into war crimes committed by the United States by effectively losing his job. Again, these are not stories that you read about or that you hear in the evening news, but this is the reality. The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, the chief prosecutor right before the current chief prosecutor, when that chief prosecutor wanted to look into repeated allegations, complaints received by the International Criminal Court that the United States was guilty of war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, the United States lobbied to make sure that that chief prosecutor is not reappointed. So he lost his job. The current chief prosecutor has a history of avoidance when it comes to the United States and Israel. The current chief prosecutor, while very swift to indict Russia for war crimes and very swift to indict members of the south of the globe, third world, for alleged war crimes, dragged his feet on and on and on when it came to Israel and the United States. But again, to be very clear, the evidence of atrocities and genocide were so overwhelming, literally a mountain of evidence, that he basically was put in a situation of either refusing to indict and thus delegitimating his office and the International Criminal Court altogether. When you have a mountain of evidence and you have human rights organizations saying, look, there's a mountain of evidence. If he failed to act, the clear result of that would have been that the International Criminal Court would be seen as an entirely political organization and a joke, and that it would lose legitimacy to prosecute anyone for any type of atrocity. So although extremely reluctant, the chief prosecutor eventually caved in and passed indictments, and at the same time although the evidence compared to the evidence of Israeli atrocities, evidence of atrocities committed by Palestinian forces, in comparison, was not as resolute and based on far lesser number of testimonies. The indictment was also extended to Palestinian individuals, and he knew quite well that in doing so, he's playing a political game hoping to lessen and mitigate the impact of a US and Israeli reaction. I mention all of this because it is critical to understand the historical moment that our president met with a suspected war criminal. And instead of arresting that war criminal or in any way holding that war criminal in any way accountable or responsible, Trump not just defended the war criminal without reservations, not just sent a message to the world, when it comes to Israel, we don't care what Israel did or did not do. We don't care if Israel committed massacres. We don't care if Israel committed rapes. We don't care if Israel displaced a population under occupation. We simply do not care. And in fact, if you listen to what Trump said, that if you care, you are anti-Semitic, and you possibly are violating American law, which is a problem under our First Amendment and freedom of speech. The same freedom of speech that, lest we forget, from the days of the Salman Rushdie affair, ad nauseum, the same type of people that support Trump are the same people who claim that Muslims are incapable of understanding values like freedom of speech because of the Salman Rushdie affair. And how many Islamophobes dwelt on and on and on about how Muslims do not understand elevated values like freedom of speech. But in one swoop, the chairs are turned, and suddenly the values of freedom of speech are not as sacred when it comes to holding a certain type of people accountable. So Trump then says, I've got a solution. I have the solution. What is the solution? We're going to move Palestinians off their land. We're going to make Palestinians the problem of other people other than Israel. We're going to let Israel off the hook. Israel led a genocidal war, but Palestinians did not leave their land. Well, we're going to achieve that goal anyway. Even if Palestinians didn't leave their land after being bombed with American-made weapons for an entire year, somehow we're going to do it. And how it's going to be done is a critical point. We are going to rely on our proxy dictators. We are going to rely on our king in Jordan and our general in Egypt to effectively do what Israel could not do. Now, let me cut to the chase and say very clearly that there's nothing new in this scene. This entire theater It is a page out of history. How so? Well, since colonialism, colonizing powers or colonial powers have always relied on proxy powers, on local natives to leverage force against their own people. Colonialism realized a long time ago that if colonial powers use force, that causes solidarity among the colonized. The colonized closes ranks. The solution is to create proxy rulers like Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, and to have these proxy rulers leverage overwhelming force to achieve the goals that the colonial powers desire and want. And this is the reason that Trump wanted Netanyahu to stop bombing, is that Trump was saying, you've got this wrong. If you want Palestinians displaced, don't do it yourself. Use our agents, our domestic agents, because these domestic agents can leverage power, can oppress their own people without conscience, against their own best interests, including sometimes, quite often, against the best interests of these local leaders. Their job is to do our dirty work. And this is how we get things done in the world. We don't soil our own hands. We do the dirty work through our proxy agents, who are in every sense of the word colonial agents. The mistake that Trump did, and you could see the discomfort on Netanyahu's face, is that he jumped the gun and proclaimed, instead of doing the proxy talk, he uncovered or revealed the ultimate result that the colonists desires. We displace the Palestinian population, we make Gaza a Riviera, and who ultimately is going to benefit? It will be the United States. What he didn't say is that in Trump's mind, turning Gaza into a Riviera will not be done with American money. It will be done with Saudi money. In his mind, not only are we going to extort $1 trillion from Saudi Arabia, but we are going to force the Gulf countries, Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, to rebuild Gaza and turn Gaza into a playground. And just so you know how history repeats itself, into a playground for the ugly American. The prototype of the ugly American is the American who travels around the world seeking pleasure and self-interest without much regard for the aspirations, for the self-determination, for the hopes and dreams of native populations. The ugly American is the American who deals with the world as their playground, regardless of what the indigenous interests might be or might not be. And so effectively what Trump did is just say, the vision of the ugly American, will take the Palestinian problem off Israel's hands, and the net result will be to create more space for the ugly American to play around the world. Now, is this new? Well, not really. The idea of moving Palestinians to Sinai goes all the way back to the 1970s, shortly after the 1967 war. The same plan has been offered by Israel time and time again. And in fact, recently we find that Trump, the American administration, has even adopted the language of Judea and Samaria, referring to the West Bank. Now, to be very clear, notice what is going on here. There's a narrative, if you will, a religious, social, cultural, political narrative. The narrative of the colonizer. The narrative that privileges the voice of the Israeli Jewish tradition. That narrative is at odds, for instance, with the Islamic narrative. And what the US is saying, and what Zionism is saying, your God might have told you differently, but our God has said something else, our religious narrative. And the entire world must follow our narrative to the exclusion of your narrative. So the irony is when the Emirates and Israel talk about religious pluralism and Abrahamic Accords, we all overlook the fact that the very Abrahamic Accords is founded on religious exclusion, on cultural exclusion. Why? Because it is the voice of the Israeli God, the religious narrative of Zionism, to the exclusion of all other religious narratives. So when we refer to this region as Judea and Samaria, and we say we're going to remove the population of Judea or the population of Gaza, what we are saying is a classic colonial narrative. It is our manifest destiny that counts. It is the promise of history to us that counts. You indigenous, you native, are on the margins. Your narrative, to the extent that it is at odds with ours, doesn't matter. In fact, it doesn't matter so much that your voice doesn't matter and you don't matter, and thus genociding you is not a big deal. I want to take you back to a historical moment. I remember Trump saying in his first presidency, everyone warned me about moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. Everyone told me that there will be a Muslim uproar. And see, I did it. And nothing followed. Nothing happened. History speaks very loudly. You want to understand why Trump celebrated Netanyahu, why Trump spoke about Palestinians so dismissively, why Trump looks at colonial agents in Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia, these petty tyrants, and tells them, you're tyrants, you're bullies. Don't give me this nonsense about your people won't accept this or won't like this. Your very job is to effectuate our will, your masters. You are your people's masters. You can abuse them as much as you want with no consequences. But we are your masters. And we can abuse you as much as we want without consequences. That is the truth. That's the picture that presented itself. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم اسألوا الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه واتبعوا بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. This is why when Trump says, no, they will do it, it is because essentially someone like Trump understands the true nature of the rulers of the region, understands that they're bullies. Their job is to bully their own people. Their job is to break the will of their own people to deliver the results that the colonial master wants. But this has been the lesson of history for the past couple of centuries. Part of this, part of the entire colonial attitude is that you don't take indigenous aspirations, in a word, self-determination, that sort of magical buzzword, at all seriously. The American Indians said, this land is the land of our ancestors. We have been rooted here for hundreds of years. But you, in your playground attitude, want to play. And the American Indians are in the way. Move them. Solve the problem. Now, yes, your stories about your ancestors and your aspirations and your gods and your religious, your secret space, and etc., it's all very interesting. Leave that to the academics. But we want our playground. Get out of the way. Same thing with the colonizers in South Africa. Same thing with the colonizers in the Congo. Same thing with the colonizers in North Africa. Time and time again. Your narratives, what your God tells you, what your history tells you, is an academic curiosity at best. Let professors at Stanford and Harvard and whatever write nice books about it. But ultimately, the whole premise is the world is our playground and we want to play. We are entitled to play. If we want to turn Gaza into a Riviera so we can play, so be it. But here's the thing. Why is Trump so confident? Well, he's so confident because he knows that the colonial agents in the region are ready to deliver the playground that the master demands at any time. He knows that the King of Jordan, all the US and or any colonial power has to do is snap their fingers, and the King of Jordan or the President of Egypt or the King of Saudi Arabia or the whatever of the Emirates will say, yes, master, here is your playground. We will transform our territory into your playground. Anything goes to earn your pleasure, master, to keep you happy, master. This is precisely why when Trump looks at the International Criminal Court, Trump just imposed sanctions against the International Criminal Court, sending the message clearly, International Criminal Court, have you really bought into the narrative that you are an institution of law to hold the white-skinned man and the dark-skinned man equally accountable? International Criminal Court, wake up. We've created you not as a concession of our privileges. We don't concede that power to you. No, we've created you to reaffirm and further anchor our privileges. So what we want from you, International Criminal Court, is to hold the dark-skinned man accountable when they commit a genocide and when they commit war crimes, but not to return the gaze unto the colonizer, unto the white man coming from Eastern Europe into Palestine and colonizing Palestine and dismissing the narrative and the dreams and the history and the culture and the religion of the natives as irrelevant and unimportant. So that is why the Trump administration imposes sanctions on the International Criminal Court, sending an unmistakable message. An unmistakable message. It is okay if you indict Libyans. It is okay if you indict Sudanese. It is okay if you indict Africans. It is okay if you indict Lebanese. It is okay if you hold the indigenous, colonized, to the rules of the game. But it is not okay if you forget who are the masters of this universe. And if you now want to indict the master who created you in the first place. Why do I emphasize this narrative? People, when Allah tells us that you are the best of nations, why are you the best of nations? Because if you anchor yourself in your own religious narrative, into what your God tells you, as opposed to the God of Israel, or the manifest destiny of the United States, you are supposed to be a shining moral example unto nations, recognizing what is right and recognizing what is wrong, and speaking loudly as to what is right and denouncing loudly what is wrong. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. You are the best. The problem is that if you are a Muslim and you are deaf to the narrative of history, you no longer listen, you no longer understand. And because you no longer listen and you no longer understand, the very function, the goal and purpose for which God made you a Muslim is no longer there. And that is the true success of colonialism. When it colonizes your intellect, when it colonizes your heart, when it colonizes your soul, so that you are no longer, in any real sense, a Muslim. That is precisely, and I will stop with this is precisely the problem with Emirati Islam. This is precisely the problem with Saudi Islam. This is precisely the problem with Egyptian Islam coming out of Azhar. Is that it tells you, do your ibadat, but be tone deaf. Don't listen to history. Don't comprehend history. In fact, keep your eyes shut to the realities of the past few centuries. Exist in a state of delusion and confusion. So you're no longer aware of what is special about Islam, what your role as a Muslim is, what is the point of this entire religion, what is the point of this entire huda, this entire guidance. In what way is Islam a light unto humanity? It is okay to be oblivious. We want you oblivious. What we want you to think that what Islam brought to humanity is the scarf that a woman wears. Bravo. That's Islam for you. That what Islam brought to the world is prohibiting music. That's it. Bravo. So often, young people come and say, why are things so bad for Muslims? We are experiencing a crisis of faith because where is God's victory? How can God give victory to a people who are oblivious, who see the signs of God but ignore the signs of God? What type of unjust God would aid a people who truly, in every sense, do not help themselves? Is your job awareness? Absolutely. Awareness, learning to learn and listen and understand history and the lessons of history is no small task. In fact, it is quite a feat and quite an accomplishment. اللهم اعف عنا اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم تب علينا واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Lord, forgive our sins. Aid us to be better Muslims, to listen to your voice, not to ignore your voice in the same way that the colonizer has taught us to ignore your voice. Allah, help us become good students of history and the lessons that history educates its students on. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. اسألوا الله يستجب لكم وأقم الصلاة.